Thank you so much. This has been fascinating, I think, interesting analysis that and very comprehensive that we have received here. And we will open up the Q&As for all of you, so don't be shy and just post your questions. But I can't resist, as a scholar in international relations, I just have to return to the Middle East in the global world and to give some reflections, because by the end of the day, we see major trends taking place. Anders sort of touched upon it. But what would be, and this is like a question I throw out to you, and anyone who would like to pick up on it could give a very snappy reflection again about the future, not prediction, but maybe a little bit of forecasting. We have discussed the US. We know that during the Cold War, first, I mean, the Middle East has always had a very heavy presence, international presence, in the way of colonialism, in the way of the Cold War, and then, as Anders mentioned, the war on terror. So they have always been having this huge impact. And now we see changes here with the US engagement globally and particularly to the Middle East. And there are new actors, Russia returning to the stage. And we have China in the background. It's only that we keep focusing on maybe other areas. So just to a quick reflection, if somebody would like to pick up on that and to give sort of an indication of where we are moving, where the Middle East in the globalized world in the next decades, how it may look, what trends should we keep an eye on? And then also thinking about, as Anders said, about the European Union, we also have the United Nations, you know? Where do we have the global international community engaged on these huge challenges that will affect not only Europe, but also worldwide? So who would like to pick up on that question? Rosberg felt a challenge, so.
I think everyone is projecting China, but that's not because the Chinese want them to do it. So I think it's much more about everyone else talking about the Chinese. I think if you're thinking about the Middle East in the next 10, 15 years, it's local ownership. The Saudis and the UAE and all these countries who have some kind of capacity are no longer interested in waiting for the Americans to make up their mind. They don't care about the EU to begin with, but they will go it alone and then sell what they can on what they've decided to the Americans, to the Chinese, to the Russians. So I think what it's really about is that this is a multipolar world. It's just that when people talked about multipolarity 10 years ago, they thought it was about the Europeans coming back on the international stage. That's not the thing. It's everyone else who locally is stronger, who is now coming onto the scene. And that is affecting international relations because their region is not only their own.
Thank you.
Shall I? Oh, yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Rola.
Thank you. So I was thinking, actually, when you started talking about China, that we know that the US has wanted to make a pivot to China. I think that was the term under Obama and now again under the Biden administration. But they keep being pulled into the Middle East, whether they like it or not. And that is something that is quite parallel to what we saw in the region during the Cold War, when it was, I think the expression was the tail wagging the dog, where the local powers in the region basically making the US do things. And I think this kind of tacks on what Rosbe just said about local actors in the region becoming more assertive and maybe getting the international community, but definitely their main ally, the US, to do what they wanted to do.
Thank you, Rola. Anna?
For me, the rise of China is very real. I don't think it is sort of a myth. It's absolutely real. And I think the rise of China reminds me of of US development during the late 19th century. Grow fast and strong at home, cause no trouble abroad. That's sort of, I think, is the China model right now. And I also think that we will see an intense security competition between the US and China. It seems inevitable to me in some way or form. Exactly what it would look like, difficult to say. But I think both Europe, we already see that Europe is in decline. The data for that is everywhere. So the rise of China is parallel with the decline of Europe. And I think, and I agree with what Rola said, that the US has been trying to pivot to Asia for over a decade, but keeps sort of being pulled back into the Middle East. The phrase here is, of course, that now that it was the tail wagging the dog during the Cold War, but now it is, you may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. But I think, again, here's a prediction for whatever it's worth, I think both Europe and the Middle East will sort of be in the shadows here. And what that will mean for sort of our self-image and the self-image of people in the Middle East who sort of constantly is getting attention from everybody and everything. Being in the shadows might be an interesting development.
I'm not sure I would agree that the Middle East will be in the shadows, because we know that China is investing in the Middle East. We know that there is a lot of money being spent, for example, in North Africa from China. So I think it's part of their, Belt and Road Initiative, to kind of put money in the region.
Yes.
And they're trying to fight the US for hegemony in the region. I still think that China will be maybe a regional hegemon in Asia, more than an international hegemon like the United States.
Can I just reply back?
I'm sure there are questions here. So a very quick response, and then we have to open up also for Q&As.
Sure. I just think we have to be careful not to use the old paradigm in reading what's happening now or what could happen in the future. So the kind of future Chinese hegemony is very, very different from what the US was. It's not interested in military bases, sort of elsewhere. The Belt Road, the investment in that. And then the rise of the regional power brokers. So this whole sort of configuration is, the outcome of it will depend on its evolution and the process in it. I don't think it's sort of carefully designed sort of beforehand to give us a clear sort of output. But what we know is that China plays a very different game. Its end sort of results are radically different from what you had sort of throughout the American century, if you like.
Yeah. And Lina, just a quick note maybe on climate change can't be tackled only regionally. It has to be globally and internationally.
Definitely, yeah. But
an indication of...
In adaptation, it can and it has to, but it requires a form of regional adaptation rather than kind of state-boundaried, especially on water resources and river basins. That requires regional cooperation.
Great. Thank you. We open up for Q&As, and I have a question down there, first one there. Just raise your hand and you will get the microphone. And please present who you are and, yes, your question to the point. No long statements because we have limited time, so to the point.
Yes,
Thanks.
Thank you. My name is Hanna. I work at the Raoul Wallenberg Institute of Human Rights. And I have a question about environmental movements in the region. I wonder, talking about local ownership and weak civil society, is this among the youth? Is this an area where they could get together, or has it happened? And if it has, what impact could it have?
Do you want to take that?
Lina?
well, I mean, no. Too many questions at the same time. I mean, there are organizations working where environmental challenges is a common, a common thing, and there are examples. But yeah, you don't read a lot about it. There's not.
No.
More local, probably. Not so much that you hear about it over here.
I'm not quite sure about the question. You're asking about sort of activism in the region or entrepreneur? Yeah. No.
Should I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I can take this. I think what we're seeing in the region is more an interest among the upper middle class in environmental issues, not among the majority of the people. If you have to worry about where your next meal is coming from, you're not going to care about the environment. So I don't think we see a large social movement about the environment. You do have NGOs, but they tend to be localized, and the people manning them tend to be middle class, upper middle class, youth who can basically write a grant application in English to get the money from the international community.
I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, there is variation, but I think the problem, in a sense, is something that is much more generic, and that's the fact that when you have local initiatives, at some point they will end up on the radar of the state. And all of these states, no matter how they define themselves, are paranoid about non-state actors or organizations. So even though you just want to save a bird in the middle of nowhere, the fact that you're organizing people to do it tends to make you into a security threat.
Especially if it's foreign funded. I mean, the country I'm familiar with is Egypt, and it has a very specific law about raising funds from foreign entities. That indeed sort of puts you on the radar of it, regardless of what the issue is. It doesn't have to be a sensitive issue or a political one. But also when you ask a question like this, the picture is so inconsistent across the region itself. There are some winners from sort of climate change, and the majority are losers, but the priorities are so different within each country. Again, sort of back to Egypt, it's still complacent in the whole Nile sort of water issue, with its almost sort of God-given right to 70% of the Nile basin water that was written in 1953, that Ethiopia is challenging, leaving the other 15 countries of the basin to share 30% of it, and they're still fighting over that. So there's a lot of complacency in that as well, and there is no national policy. I haven't seen the national adaptation programs within the countries that I'm familiar with are a box ticking, not really sort of followed up by any form of adaptation in these countries. So if you have that sort of at that scale, at the national scale, that's what kind of entices or kind of pushes sort of ground movement down from it. And under the kind of repression that you have, political repression that you have in the Middle East, it's very easy to label any of this as dissent.
Just to insert a very small but I think important optimism to the analysis here, there's actually one foundation, the ECHO Peace in the Middle East, and that's because we have a theme at the Pufendorf Institute on hydro-solidarity, where we try to find and identify cases of hydro-solidarity, also cross-border, cross-nationally. And I want to mention the ECHO Peace because that's actually a cooperation between Jordanian, Palestinians and Israelis, where neighbors locally cooperate across borders, despite the fact that we have a collapsed peace process. So despite the fact that political elites are actually rejecting this kind of cooperation, collaboration, we are actually in some spaces and some places in the Middle East also seeing some trends of cooperation and how actually people are trying to resolve their everyday challenges when it comes to water scarcity and try to find win-win solutions, just to insert some optimism into the scenarios here. So moving on to the next question here. I have several here, and we are keeping limited time, so I will take 2 questions at a time. And as you see, the panel is very excited of responding as well, so they will be able to synthesize their answers. So 2 questions in a row, please.
Thank you. My name is Lisa Strömbom. I'm from the Department of Political Science. I have a question to anyone in the panel who wants to pick up on it, to kind of continue on the international theme, because I'm thinking about the kind of future role of third parties and especially donors and states, organizations who have assisted with, for example, good governance, security sector reform, state building in the region during many years, and most recently after the Arab Spring. And with what you've talked about now, governance failure, surge of authoritarianism, what will be the role of third parties in the future? Will it be kind of a hands-off approach, just disaster relief, and kind of a very very reactive role, or will there be a role for third parties in the kind of donor industry that we've seen before? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Hey, thanks for the presentations. My name is Pınar Dinç and I'm a researcher at the Center for Advanced Middle Eastern Studies. Actually, my question relates to both previous questions because you have made presentations about, you talked about projections, about the environment, about states, societies, youth, etc. in the Middle East. And Ruzbe said something about, democracy and governance, and you also said something about the top-down process. And I think the first question was about the bottom-up, and you said, I sort of disagree with the answer, that I think there are people who are poor who are also resisting. There is definitely environmental resistance in the Middle East by the poor, by the marginalized as well. So I think, and my question was about precisely that, not only about environmental resistance, but where does resistance stand in this whole debate? Because we also, as you rightly said, Ruzbe, we have to talk about the bottom-up as well. And it seems to me that we don't. And then it makes me think about democracy, not only governance, but also democracy, because lack of democracy is what contains resistance, what seizes as, foreign invested or, alien or terrorist, right? So I'm thinking, my question is, both like how these non-democratic authoritarian states in the Middle East contain or narrate these resistances, bottom-up resistances, and also the international actors, like they're usually funders or intergovernmental organizations, EU, UN, etc. But like it seems to me that they also have a containing role in these bottom-up resistances. So I wondered your take, and I can conclude with, like, there's a very famous, I think, Twitter page it is called "Is the EU Concerned?" And then it keeps tweeting, yes, very, very much. And that maybe gives you an idea about my question as well. Thank you.
Quick, crisp, to the point response from the panel. Rosberg.
Very good questions, very relevant. I totally agree. I think the difference is this. It's also methodological. What is resistance? What constitutes resistance? Do you have to see it, and does it have to be oppositional in order for you to be able to define it as resistance? If you go and look among poor women in a semi-rural place in Iran, you will find them organizing themselves around what they can affect. Because it's their life, they have no choice. There's no opportunity, you can't withdraw from that. Is that resistance? It's not resistance with the big R, it's not political, it's not existential, but it's existential in the everyday sense. No donor is going to pick up on that because they won't see it, it's not on their radar, but it's happening all the time. Can it have systemic effects? Well, that's the next level of organization. If they want to go there and if they can go there, and that's when it's easier to be pessimistic, because that is a much different hurdle to overcome. But when it comes to the donors in all of this, I just want to say this. The EU gives money for all kinds of things, yes? The problem isn't the money, the problem is the lack of consistency. You're giving money with one hand and you're accepting and accommodating the BS of the authoritarians with the other hand, okay? That is never going to compute. That doesn't mean that the only thing you can do then is to say, I'm not going to give you any money because you're not doing what I want. Because that's making the perfect the enemy of the doable. But the problem with the doable right now is the inertia of sticking to the authoritarians because you know them and they give stability.
Complex questions and complex responses, not easy to do that very crisp. Anyone else who would like to pick up on this, or could we move on with the questions?
I can just add a few points.
Very quick, yeah.
What sort of Western governments and the EU will do is to uphold security. That is and also upholding government structures, however imperfect they may be. We see it very clearly with Syria, with Lebanon, with Israel, Palestine, with Egypt. We have so much underestimated the consequences of collapse and state failures over the past 20 years. The consequences of those have been horrible, both, of course, for the Middle East and also from Europe. For Europe.
Thank you, Anders. So I had one question over there, and also another one there, and a third one there. So we take all these three, and we will let the panel conclude on that. And you can pick and choose your response. So who have the microphone? Yes.
Yeah, so just in line with the last point you've mentioned, so you know the authoritarians, so you just like the doable thing, like, okay, you still support them even if you know that they might not be the perfect ones, but like, for instance, let's talk about the EU rule in Iraq. They meet the leaders of organizations that are on the terrorism list of the US and give them legitimacy, and, you know, like, people can't do anything about that if such like powerful organizations or representatives like the EU does that. So how can the EU help, or the UN does the same thing, unfortunately, can help the people of Iraq and the uprising of the youth there?
Thank you. Next question over there.
Thank you so much. My name is Joel and I'm a PhD student in comparative politics in the Middle East. And my question relates to something that Rola said about sort of concessions that are made and these reforms that are obviously just, and I agree with you that it's just for show, like women winning the right to drive in Saudi Arabia and that sort of thing. But my question is, if, I mean, this is still a positive change, or would you, do you think that it would be better to sort of remain on a hard line until such a point that there could be more structural change? And also related to that, do you think that in the long run it's will it be effective? Like, will that be enough? These like small performative concessions. Thank you.
Thank you, Joel. So we have one final question down there, and then we will let the panel respond.
Hi there, my name's Dr. Mark Robinson. I'm from the Centre for International Studies and Diplomacy at SOAS, London University. However, my presence here in London is for a completely different reason, but let's leave that aside. It's a great panel, thank you very much. It's incredibly polite. I'm going to try and throw in a little bit of controversy as your last question. I spent a couple of years in Qatar. I absolutely love the country, and if I'm trend spotting breakthroughs, I think it was way overdue in Islamic State having a big world sporting event. And next year on our TVs in November and December, there's going to be the FIFA World Cup. Putting aside how Qatar got that, do you agree that it's a breakthrough? And are you looking forward to, you know, the world hearing a little bit of a different story about the Gulf and what Qatar brings to the world?
Okay, that's not maybe a straightforward answer on that one, but we actually have to round up here, and I will let the panel respond in order to pick and choose whatever you like to respond to. Lena, would you like to go out first?
Yes, sure. I don't really have a lot of answers here. I can just be hopeful about when it comes to climate change in the Middle East, and that is one thing I forgot to say before, is that extreme weather is nothing really new in the Middle East, which is sort of comforting. There are already ways to live with high temperatures and low amounts of rainfall, so that's a good thing, maybe.
Okay, thank you. Rosbe.
Let me connect the first question and the penultimate question. I'm going to leave the football out of it. I mean, I don't mind. I like football, watching it and so on. That's fine. Whether it means a big thing or not is a different issue. And I think that has to do with the checkbook, but we can leave that for another time. Look, as I said before, you can't let the perfect become the enemy of the doable. Okay? So there has to be an element of pragmatism in what you do. So there is no change that's going to be binary. It's not going to go from 0 to 1. And that means that your responsibility, if you will, is to try and help shepherd or encourage whatever change there is and see where you can help augment it, make it more. But there's never going to be a situation when even not the empire of America can sit down and dictate change and see it through, and it becomes indigenous, so to speak. That doesn't exist except in the fantasies of policy paper writers. So that means that you're going to have to accept that there's a limit to your power, no matter how big your checkbook is, and you have to figure out where you can make the biggest difference without not only letting on, but also accepting that it's not tutelage. It's not tutelage. Even a whiff of tutelage and you're screwed. So you have to also be humble Not only in what you can do, but also in the fact that you are not there to teach people how to be, because they're not going to take it.
Thank you. Miu.
I'll take the football one. So, well, a fellow Brit. So, well, if Sweden wins, then yes, for sure. Now, on a serious note in that one, you said it's high time that an Islamic state has got to stage the UEFA Cup. I think the positive side and the glimmer of hope in that is actually brought to the surface the whole issue of migrant rights and sort of the human rights in that. There is talk about it. I think there's a little bit of kind of a whitewash and window dressing sort of from Qatar, but it kick-started the whole thing. It would have been covered if they would have been able to kind of suppress it, but it became too big for the labor that it imported, particularly from South Asia, from India and Pakistan and Bangladesh, to start talking about the human rights of migrants there. So that's a glimmer of hope sort of in that. So thanks to an Islamic State taking that the way they want it, the way they're doing it, that we're starting sort of to talk about sort of migrant rights in that. Donors and donor help. I've worked for a few going back to the mid-1980s, and I think the question is always what's driving it. So there is always sort of good intentions, but if the real driver behind it is a containment approach, particularly keep migrants there rather than sort of genuine sort of reform, then we will continue to get what we're having. It's a very delicate balancing act, sovereignty issues, all of that stuff. How much can you push for any of these things? And I think it's kind of a bit of both rather than a completely sort of polarized in that sense.
Okay, thank you. Rola.
Yes, I actually will respond to both Joel and the question about Qatar.
On a quick note.
Yes. So regarding Qatar, I think it's not the fact that it's an Islamic state that is important here. I think Qatar is an example of a state, small state, that is trying to punch above its weight on the international scene. And we know that it has been doing that or trying to do that for the past 3 decades using different instruments of foreign policy, including finances, but also soft power, such as Al Jazeera. So I think this is just the the latest instance of Qatar doing that. Regarding your question on women and cosmetic reforms, or what I'm calling cosmetic reforms, I think these cosmetic reforms can be very important in certain settings. For example, the quota that Jordan or Morocco is giving to women on the legislative and in local elections. Because this will encourage more women to be part of the political scene. But still, something like the driving in Saudi Arabia, I don't think of that as a positive thing, because what MBS did was take away an issue that activists had been lobbying for years, and basically take it and make it his own. It's now a grant, something the king from his, kingliness or princeliness is giving onto the people. It's a grace. It's not their right that they have lobbied for anymore. And the fact that he put Loujain El-Hazloul in prison for several years is definitely making that clear to me. So I hope that answers it.
Thank you, Rola. And finally, Anders.
Yeah, I will eagerly pick up about the soccer question as well. First, I would say, if there are any sort of young students here, these are good topics to write about: Qatar, Dubai, normative power, and all these kind of sort of events. I have a little bit more of a critical reflection here, because I compared Qatar and their bid for the football, for the FIFA World Cup, to, say, when China hosted the Olympics in 2008 and when Russia hosted the previous World Cup in football. And a lot of people said then as well, it would lead to breakthrough, but breakthrough to what? I mean, yes, it glorified the states, and a lot of people came there and they were successful events, but what really did it lead to? And I'm not sure about the answer there. So therefore somebody should maybe look into it a little bit deeper and unpack it. On a principle level, I would say that I am in favor of sort of integrating the Gulf region with the world. But again, what would it lead to? Some of these projects, I think, actually reinforces authoritarian structures, like, for example, the peace agreements between the new Abraham Accord. They will likely make these states more authoritarian, just like the previous peace agreements with Egypt and Jordan have made these places more authoritarian. So again, breakthrough, perhaps, but what kind of breakthrough, and breakthrough to what? But thanks for your question.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for an amazing, fantastic panel, first of all. I am sure there are other questions, but we have to end here. We're already actually running behind schedule. And thank you, the whole audience. I just want to encourage you to continue this conversation elsewhere and with us, because the Center of Advanced Middle Eastern Studies has a whole research seminar series. If you check out our website, it's for the public. You can attend if you like. So just check out our website for the latest activities that we are doing there. So thank you very much for coming, attending, and posing really challenging questions. And again, remember, Megatrends Challenges for the Future is about identifying windows of opportunities for change for a better world. Finishing on that note, thank you.